Look, see, so far away. That was a long trip.
Ah, people outside drinking coffee.
How are you?
Oh yeah, we're here.
Awesome. That's the exact way.
That's better.
Okay,
Let's
good.
sit. Let's sit mid-row.
Mid-row?
Mid-row.
Nobody wants to sit up front and hang out with me?
I've always been the front of the class kind of person, but
I'll
go wherever.
Awesome.
My natural inclination is to go like in the middle, like a movie theater.
Right?
It's about where I like.
Yeah, give me an aisle, because
You can have the aisle. I'm gonna silence my phone.
Ooh, that's a good point.
So I'm not doing that. Like, most people don't call me anytime, you know.
first of all, nobody calls me or anything.
But if it was gonna happen, it would definitely happen like in something like this.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Given.
So, my name's Andrews. I'm from the Church of Witchcraft, non-denominational, all modalities of witchcraft sort of stuff, and we're just doing talks every month here in Colorado Springs. We're also doing them now in Denver.
I saw that listed.
Yeah, that is going to be interesting, because I'm not sure what that turnout's going to be like versus here. You know, it's good to have those kinds of conversations. So thank you, everybody, for being here. I appreciate it. We're going to go around the room and see what our names are. We'll start with you.
I'm Madison.
Any practice?
Curiosity.
Curiosity. Awesome.
Thea and Curiosity.
Hey, curiosity. Awesome.
I'm Mike, always curiosity, reclaiming, and Pet the Great Man.
Okay.
Oh, it's my turn.
Oh,
I
yeah.
felt like I was someone behind
I want to be last.
I'm Mia, and my altar is to Bestat. Always curious about stuff. Always like to find other people that are interested in things like this. I try to hit up a lot of expos and things like that. So this is just another thing I'm going to put in my pile.
Nice. Well, thank you.
I'm Brian, and I've always been a very spiritual and all kind of realms kind of person, so anytime that I can kind of introduce myself or reintroduce myself to something, I'm up for it. So it's kind of cool that you guys have this. So.
Yeah, awesome. Well, again, thank you for being here. We might have people filter in throughout. Just so everybody's aware, that camera is recording, so if you have any issues with that, please let me know. We can get you out of that, or make sure your names are scrubbed or whatever, just so you're aware. So you're not just like, wait a minute, I didn't know this was going to be live, because this will go on our YouTube channel, which we actually now have. So every one of these goes up on our YouTube channel so that you can watch them. So if you miss the attendance, you can see them. There's one. This is now two. So there will be two after this gets done, and then we'll have a third at the end of the month. So there's a lot of opportunity there, just so you're aware that that is recording. Any questions for me initially?
No,
You're like the main character.
I was like, no, I was getting
I'm an open book here, where you can always ask questions if you have inquiry about the organization, Church of Witchcraft, or my own practice, and that sort of thing. You'll hear some of that.
Well, actually, could you go over Church of Witchcraft? We were actually talking about it on the way in the car. I was like, I have no idea I have no idea who that is.
Cool, that's a great question. What is the Church of Witchcraft? Like I had alluded to, non-denominational, all modalities sort of witchcraft. We're basically just jumped up librarians with a penchant for magic and witchcraft. That's essentially, what we want to do is we want to help support covens eventually. They're very difficult to find, and the ones that we do find often implode within 2 to 3 months. Our interest in the eventual future is to find covens and help them stabilize. So if they are on the verge of imploding, like their leadership just leaves, or if they have some of those difficulties with personality or politics, then we could step in temporarily and help them stay the course until they can find their replacement leadership, so that we don't get more implosions, so that people can flourish. Right now we're working mostly on community outreach, so external community, internal community sort of stuff, in a way that's approachable for people, because I see really often that pagan groups of any iteration, covens too, they tend to just show up and be like, let's do ritual together, please come to my ritual. But there's so many pieces to that. Even if it's an open ritual, there's a lot of baggage that comes with that, a lot of biases, and can be kind of intimidating for people. And so we were like, wait a minute, what if we just talk to people instead? And help them have a place they get a foothold and just go, oh yeah, we want to connect people to other covens and that sort of thing. And so overall kind of that support. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, we're really new. There's 3 of us. I'm one of the 3 that helps run this whole thing. We just opened and touching on this, we started a Discord finally. So we want to encourage people to get together on there for additive magic, subtractive magic, and supportive, for either internal or external communities, talk about their projects or altars, and sort of help people have that platform outside of Facebook, and also a little bit more on the rails so that, we don't get into infighting and stuff on Facebook and all the troll stuff. They're there for a purpose, right? So I can get you that link in the future, and we have business cards, and at the end you guys can sign them as well if you want us to be on our email list, and we can send you some of those resources too.
Fantastic.
Does that kind of answer your question?
That's great. Did a great job.
Excellent. I've been doing this for a little bit. We've been around.
I love it.
We've been here about 3 years. I started it, of course, in the pandemic, 2020, and then now we'll be starting our 3rd year this year, which is bizarre. So it's good. It's good. We have this ton of support. So today, does anybody know what we're talking about other than you?
I believe it was about anxiety. Yes.
Yeah.
Stress is anxiety.
Yeah. And specifically, what aspect? Resolving stress and anxiety through witchcraft, right? And that could be in a little variety of different ways. I'm going to make some references to the last talk that we had. It won't be too heavy, so you won't be lost by any means, but it will track through. And you can look at that, like I said, on our YouTube. Is that the right one? Yeah, it is. Good job. So my first part of this is, so you know my name, I'm Andrews. I'm part of the Church of Witchcraft. We kind of went over that. My role is I'm the head of it. The reason that we have this organization is because we're playing the American game. You have to have an organized structure, and so that's how that ended up happening. I started it, so I'm helming it, basically. There's a whole bunch of other, like I said, there's 2 other people, and we have a whole other variety of things that are available in positions in there. I generally celestial witchcraft, so that's not specifically a codified tradition. I'm working on it. But I'm focused mostly on astrology, celestial bodies, oneiromancy, divination, introspection, shadow work, that sort of stuff. Tends to be my bag, more than hanging out with trees. Trees are great. I love nature, don't get me wrong. But that's not, I don't get all jazzed and all magicked up for trees. So, and some people really do, and that's great. Some people like go stand on grass fields and just go, man, I just love grass. And I'm like, good for you, man. I love the moon, and I
know those
plants. And there's all sorts of types.
That's right.
So all this is a non-denominational presentation. It applies to all modalities of witchcraft, so that we're not telling you what to do. We are one way, not the way. It's not possible. There's no book. There's no direction from here. Everybody has their sort of own path in relationship with the divine. So first I'm going to start with a story. More stories. My story is that I was hanging out in Manitou a couple of years ago when I kind of started this, and I had told somebody, wear my necklace or whatever, and people came up to me and they're like, man, you look like somebody famous. Somebody I should know. Are you somebody famous? And I was like, no, I'm not, but I do, help the Church of Witchcraft run. And they recoiled in horror. And we stopped. And they expected me to react in a similar way. And I didn't. I said, and then she was like, well, I'm a Christian. I was like, cool. I'm glad that you have a path to divinity. That's awesome. And she was confused because I wasn't freaking out. And I wasn't, hissing at her or screaming Latin or something, right? I was having a reasonable conversation with somebody else who has a different divinity than mine, which is totally reasonable because there's many paths to the top of the mountain, right? With that said, she was actually tolerant momentarily for a little bit. We talked, and she asked me about what witchcraft was, and the biggest thing that she asked me was, who do you turn to in times of crisis? And I stood there agog. I went, I don't know. I don't know who I turn to. I don't have Jesus Christ. Who do I turn to? What do I do? And that stuck with me all this time, right? And will continue to stay with me. So I was glad that she asked that question. I'm glad that we stopped and were able to have a conversation. And she hit me with a question that I didn't really know how to answer. And I'm still working on it, right? So this is some of my thoughts on that specifically. Encountering problems. How often, whenever you run into a situation that's challenging, do you call it a problem or difficulty? Everybody, pretty much? Any other options of wording that you use?
Some not appropriate for this.
I use that more often than not.
Right.
I I don't know. I mean, yeah, obstacles usually is the first word that comes to mind. I try not to say problem, or I try not to say like a wall. I try not to have an end cap, but it's hard to not.
Right. And that's what I mean about this kind of reframing concept. Reframing instead of opposition. These are not just challenges. These are opportunities for you to grow. They're not just, they're presented, they're a barrier to your progression, but they're not a problem. They're an opportunity for you to select going forward. Just like I had this lady recoil in horror about my particular position or whatever, and instead of being challenged or offended by this, I stopped and asked her a question, had a conversation. Thankfully, she was mostly in that same mindset, because it's not always the case. Tolerance is super important in everything, specifically with witchcraft and paganism, because there is a whole bunch of misinformation, opposition, and a whole bunch of different opportunities for us to connect with people and elucidate some of our position and some of our beliefs or divine approaches to things. It's not always super appropriate, or there might not be time, or you might not be well versed in having a conversation like that, or you might be super charged in, I'm super angry and mad now because they're challenging my own approach. And in those instances, we encourage, we encourage you just refer them to us. We'll have a conversation with them. We're level-headed. We have this conversation a lot with people. So if you're in a charge situation, you can't have a conversation, go, you want some answers? Here you go. You can go and ask them all the questions you want to. It's the same question that I get a lot of the time. Aren't all witches devil worshippers? And I'm like, boy, we have a great opportunity to have some interesting conversations, because that's a huge thing that comes across a lot, mostly from the Satanic Panic in the 80s. So yeah, we're a resource that you can kind of defer people to us if you're not able or willing to have that conversation if it's not appropriate. That's a great thing for us to fulfill. We love that, because reaching out to community is a big thing, and especially people who aren't in our field. So thinking about reframing our challenges or obstacles as an opportunity for growth, right? All of them are opportunity, which is observe things. It's what we do, right? Does everybody identify as much? I know there's some more curiosity stuff. Yep. Ish.
No.
I see more occultist than
I'm a little bit more.
Yeah.
I'd probably say that because I just have too many old world beliefs. I was raised Jewish, so I always consider myself Jewish blood as far as that. Never religious.
Right.
I've always been very spiritual, but a lot of my back beliefs are like from South America or from Asia, and there's a lot of this like rebirth and stuff like cycling. So I've never really touched on saying like I'm going to practice or anything, but that fascination from the 80s through the 90s of like there's always been some kind of
magical interaction.
Connection, energy, magnetic,
cool.
something. But cool. But definitely probably more occultist.
Yeah, we had an occultist here last month too that we were talking. All of them are appropriate. This is a great forum for everybody. Specifically, sphere of influence is another great one. So not just opportunity, but a sphere of influence that you're working in, right? Which may be either negative or positive to your own existence. So I'd like to use that phrasing. If I have an opportunity at work to grow, it's, oh, this is the sphere of influence, right? Or somebody's screaming in my face because I'm a witch or something. I'm like, oh, the sphere of influence is right now, somebody's screaming in my face, okay. And it's reframing that. And instead of setting up that, it's not setting up that dynamic of opposition, right? It's the same way of the difference between, what's the difference between a house and an outpost? We call them a house. A house comes with a whole bunch of different things to it, right? Whereas outpost is military. I'm going to go fight. I'm going to have something against something oppositional. Very different in your connotation. So similarly, instead of thinking of it as a challenge or man, I'm just so mad at this person, and I'm angry that they're angry, and now we're both angry, and now we're not getting anything done. It's not helpful. Sphere of influence helps me sort of diffuse some of that. And not just from individuals, but also just situations you might be in. Things that are close to home, difficult emotional things or circumstances in my life are opportunities, but it's just the sphere of influence and those paths. Astrology, cups, houses, signs, and sign influences. Cusps specifically are things that are just influencing our houses, right? Things that are informing us, and they pass, they change, just like you can think of any of your situations. So in those stress and anxious times, having that sphere of influence, it's passing by. And astrology can kind of inform that too. If you're looking at your chart, or you're looking at transits of that day, you know, those are going to pass. This is the influence right now, and it's moving away from here, and it's going to be something new, and it's going to be in a different house. It's going to affect family and home, or deaths and secrets, or transformation, or success and wealth. It just depends on what you're working with, and those pass. So just like anything, it passes. That's the one big thing to remember. Stress and anxiety it exists because we don't think it's going to pass. We're just locked into this thing, and having that new narrative and planting, oh, it's going to pass. It's the sphere of influence I'm working on. This is a transit that I'm going through. I also consider this the Tangled Nest. Stress and anxiety isn't just straightforward. You know, it's not just, I'm stressed because I'm angry, right? There's very rarely that you're going to get this one-to-one relationship. The Tangled Nest is all of the components that are happening for you that are producing this specific thing. These are the pieces of that influence, your emotions, your biases, faults that you may have within yourself, or perceived faults, judgments that you might have, and so on and so forth. But all of those pieces are informing and fueling your stress and anxiety, right? And knowing what each one of these pieces are will help you sort of diffuse and untangle this and start picking apart different pieces, diminishing its power, right, over you, right, allowing the stress and anxiety. So knowing that this is going to pass, knowing that there are individual components, because a really big scary thing is hard to address, like your laundry that's probably on your floor right now. Maybe. Hard to fold and put it away. Or you can take it in little pieces. I'm just going to put away my shirts. You've made some progress, congratulations, right? Similarly with the Tangled Nest, small parts, right? That'll be more relevant in a minute. How do you meet your spheres of influence? Do you meet it with anger, opposition, terror, sadness? Knowing how you respond to those spheres of influence, that transit that's going through, those initial knee-jerk reactions, and controlling for that, or at least considering going, oh yeah, no, that's not really super helpful. And not having that judgment, that's part of that Tangled Nest, right? Not judging yourself like, man, I got angry, I shouldn't have done that. There's not a should, you're a human, you have emotions, things happen, and it's okay. Like, you have to be gentle with yourself, because you're the only one that's going to be there for you, right? Nobody else is. I mean, there are people in your life that will help support you, but at the end of the day, you're it. You're going to, you know, in my nihilist sort of viewpoint, you're going to die alone, right? Our molecules, even, we have a magnetic field to all of our molecules. Molecules don't ever interact with each other, else you end up with fission, fusion, and things explode and things get crazy, right? So even that, I'm not touching this chair, you're not touching each other, right? At some fundamental level, you can't do that. And at what point does that actually become connection, or is there any connection? That's a scientific quandary that I've been dealing with. But those pieces and how you respond to that are going to inform you. That's a set of programming that you're giving yourself, and all of the you-ness of that instruction to respond in a certain way, and going and recoding that to a different type of narrative so that you can address it in a more functional way, perhaps. One big piece that I really like to think of is that what do you think anxiety is? Any guesses other than what I've already kind of mentioned?
Actually, what did I call it? What is it? It's like internal fear or something like that.
Internal fear.
Your body reacting to an internal fear or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Any other ideas on what anxiety might be? It's really simple. There's a Dr. Basinski at UCCS talks about terror management theory and our responses to death images or threats to our life and that sort of thing. Similar to like what you're saying, anxiety is that kind of internal fear. More specifically, anxiety is just the fear of your imagination. None of that is happening. Like, for example, when you start thinking, oh, I'm going to run out of money. Are you out of money right now? The answer is no, probably, right? Oh, I can't get to my next appointment because I'm going to be late. That's not happening right now. Right now, you're in this present moment. That's not happening. That's just your imaginings of that thing. Still totally relevant. I'm not saying that it's not, but understanding that your anxiety is a lot of that fear of your own imagination. And so who has control over that? I mean, you do. Witches and specifically have a massive amount of control over their own internal imagination or want to work towards that specifically. And so more control of your imagination or that understanding of how your imagination works reduces some of that anxiety. I don't need to be worried. Like, there are a series of things that I'm dealing with right now, but none of those are happening right now, and I can't predict those things that are going to happen. There's too many variables. So why worry about it? I don't have to. I can just move that aside. It's part of that Tangled Nest, right? And just like the Christian that I interacted with that particular individual, I could have responded with more of that anxiety and been thinking, oh, they're judging me. And oh, I'm not going to say the right things, but instead I was just in that specific moment and not relegated to my fear or hesitation or my initial biases to that. And I responded with a different response, which allowed that. And I really encourage people in the pagan faith or communities and witchcraft in general, please be tolerant of others and patient, because there's not really a great narrative about this community in the external community, and anything if people identify with that community, what you do is going to matter, because it's going to be it's going to be so elevated, because there's so much back that comes from that term. And I guess the question I would have for you guys is, where do you turn in times of crisis?
In general, like, my higher power is Mother Nature, so like for me in times of crisis, I just have to put myself out in nature and just be out in the woods,
So
plucking trees and playing around with the flowers and the rocks. So
That's awesome. That's more elemental kind of stuff.
Yeah.
All right, that's cool.
My therapist.
Yes, great. We're going to touch a little on that too.
But getting outside too but that is something that I talk to with my therapist. Actually, a lot of the things you're touching on are very, my background's in psychology, and a lot of it's cognitive behavioral therapy, which I use all the time. And so a lot of those things, like, it's nice to see two different kind of worlds coming together. I think it's a great holistic approach. I totally lost the train of thought of what I was talking about. I'm so excited about that. All right.
We're going to touch on Gestalt.
Great.
Times of crisis, deities or elementals.
Oh yeah, like my altar's to Bastet, so I do find that is helpful. I am trying to quiet my mind more.
Okay.
It's super difficult.
Oh yeah, no, that's a challenge. That Tangled Nest, man, that's hard. Our brains are designed that way. How about you, Mike?
I either get very stoned
Good, okay.
and remarkably just have epiphanies that help me sort shit out, or the goddess demands sovereignty.
Okay.
So,
Any specific goddess?
depends
Okay.
on the situation, on the day, etc. But so to that end, I don't think the universe has presented me with anything that I have irrevocably fucked up yet. So I think I can deal.
Yeah, that's good.
So far, so good.
Good. I'm glad. Yeah, finding those deities or finding somebody that you connect with or elementals or whatever, all of that is a piece of where you turn to in crisis.
I talk a lot to family members that have passed away. My dad, my grandma.
Oh, some ancestor.
Yeah. My mom's still with us. I talk to her a lot. So
Excellent.
friends at work.
Okay.
I'm a venter, so if I can vent for 5 minutes, then I'm usually fine.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
That's good though. Get it all
Yeah.
one shot.
As long as you have the right people to vent to.
No, I mean, definitely can blow back in your face.
But I do. I have a good support system. So.
Okay. Excellent.
Yeah. Same. I talk to my mom.
People. Got it.
Yeah.
Where do I turn to in times of crisis? So I was going to shock everybody. I really align with the negative side, baneful magic, dark stuff. Very specifically when I get overwhelmed by things, where I turn to, what has turned into is that I'll just go hang out in the dark. Just light a candle in the dark and I'll just sit there. Or sometimes I'll just be in darkness, and that really helps me just reconnect. I connect more with the dark moon versus new moon, or any lunar phases. The dark moon is definitely where I go. I think about, and I guess I turn to my witchcraft would be the broader answer of that. What spells I might do, or I might seek things, and that's sort of where I'm going with this. Yeah, it's difficult. Where do we turn to in times of crisis? And that's important to know. It's helping undo that tangled nest. Derivation of magic. Where do we get magic from? Why is that a thing? I'm not going to be a foremost authority on this. I'm just presenting ideas and what I've encountered. So brief definitions. Witch I take as basically a vocation. and we can debate that forever. Witchcraft is the witch doing a thing, so the devotion person that is doing the thing, and I think that witch is able to augment basically anything, right? It can be its own standalone belief system, or it can be an augmentation, kind of like you can be a Buddhist and be only Buddhist, but you could also be a Christian Buddhist, right? We can get off on that forever. Magic, what is magic? And that's an extraordinarily broad topic. I tend to think it's the flow of energy that we tend to work within and the connectedness to individuals, and magic is some binding, unifying force that is otherwise manipulated by physical or metaphysical means, depending on your personal preference and your own practices. I have an aversion to the word power, because power implies dominance. And power is great to have, but why do we have power? Power to control things. And I don't need power to control things. I want to learn to accept, incorporate, and love the things that aren't so great about me. You know, and I switch most people's lenses emotion to logic, mine's logic to emotion. So when I get presented with things and I get, existential threats to myself or physical threats to myself, I'm like, is this really something to be worried about? Then I go, which emotion do I need from this thing? And then I go there, right? So that was my method of accepting and harnessing some of the traits that I do really well, right? And being accepting of just the things I don't do so great, right? And so I tend to have an aversion to the word power. I don't look for power, I don't look for defense, I don't look for protection from stuff. I don't need it, because they're all here for a reason. Things that harm you, there's a reason they're here. I don't need to protect from them, I need to understand why they're happening. Whether it's me doing it to me or some outside thing doing it to me, instead of trying to just abstain from all injury forever. You can't. You're human and you're physical. Things are going to happen to you. And the idea that I'm going to protect myself from them forever is just ridiculous and fallible. You're going to get hurt. You need to be hurt. I know that sucks, but you do. And you can't grow without some of that opposition. Right? A utopian society can't exist without its foil, the not-utopian society. Nothing is utopian unless it has a foil to it, right? Just like you can't have a whole bunch of happiness without knowing or understanding sadness. It's part of the ascetic sort of idea of various different religions and approaches and philosophies, but it's sort of in that same line, denying yourself certain things, to understand the benefit to having them. So that's just my power aversion. I want to work in harmony, in tandem with. I want to partner instead of demand or control. Divinity, internal versus external. This gets a little tricky. Divinity is really just your idea of whatever spiritual approach or divine approach that you're taking. That has to do with, and that can be internal or external. Internal is my own personal power that I'm deriving from all of my various sources, where I generate all that energy from, right? It's not given to me by grace of something, where that would be external. An external practice, I suppose, would be I'm partnering with this deity, and they are providing me with this particular influence of energy, right? And there's just differences of how you interact with that. Elemental stuff is outside of you. We can dither about whether or not it's actually outside of you, because frankly, it's all just part of you, and you are an elemental in that itself, but is that an external? Like I said, we start to get some weird philosophical gray area here. Just assume that you can petition for power from something external, or you can work with something that's internal to yourself, that's the genesis of your energy or workings, area where magic comes from. Expressing your values with grace, this is something from the last session that we had. Expressing these values of your internal or external genesis of magic and how you utilize that or leverage that is the example that you want to give, the paragon of embodying that magic in your own life. The values and morals and ethics that you have going into witchcraft. Why do you affect people? Why is it that you want to affect change? How do you want to work in harmony? And exemplifying that to others helps magic grow, right? And your own, not just overall, but also in your own self and that relationship that's ongoing. And that's through basically graceful witchcraft, like we had talked about. Graceful witchcraft is that kind of ideal artistic expression of your own witchcraft and all the things that you do, your presentation, your speech, how you interact with people, like my own power aversion to that word, and that alone is part of that graceful interaction and this winding through magic and partnering and weaving through, instead of I'm going to grab this powerful thing and I'm going to go make it do this thing, right? Instead, it's how am I able to modify myself and my own approach to engage with it in a way that is conducive to where I want to go, right? The genesis of beauty, yeah, genesis of beauty, in that artful craft of your grace, of graceful witchcraft, is beautiful, right? There's so much ugliness that's in the world in general. Why create more of that? And that anger and that rage and the control and the dominance and that sort of thing brings in some of that ugliness. The idea that I can have more than you, that I'm more powerful than you on a different level, just sets up all those dichotomies and all those paradigms that, do you really want to do that? I really don't personally want to do that. I have enough to do on my own. I don't need to spend all my energy trying to control what you guys are doing. That's too much energy that I don't want to spend it that way. So, Derivation of Magic, your deities, elements, the Akashic Record, human knowledge, friends and family, like you had also mentioned, your coven. If you have a coven or working with something, your own divine spiritual group, whatever that may look like, that's a great place, that they can generate magic from. I have a burgeoning theory that, you get a bunch of witches together and like weird magic stuff starts happening just because of their proximity. Different conversation, but they can derive a lot of magic. Just the synergy of those individuals being in line with an artful, graceful, beautiful presentation creates more of that art manifestation through witchcraft. Also, you can interrupt me at any point in time if you have things that you want to say or jump in, just so you know. Colleagues and peers, working with other people in the magical community. They may not be witches, they might be occultists or what have you, and working with them and being inspired to continue my own craft and go, oh yeah, that thing, right? I pull a lot from sociology and anthropology. They're not witches, they're a bunch of scientists digging around in the dirt. And they provide a whole bunch of useful information that isn't, tied to Western colonial witchcraft and Llewellyn, which did great things, also terrible things. You can enhance your communities by inspiring through this graceful witchcraft. Discipline and values are emulated, and they model this approach to witchcraft. Right? The more you model that kind of care of your own magical community, whether or not they're part of it, because frankly most people aren't going to be part of the magical community, they don't really care or they don't understand. So being that example helps a lot and generates more of that magic, right? There's a great quote from The Roots of Ritual, and it is, "The powers of witches symbolize their ambiguous, inarticulate status. Witches are the social equivalent of beetles and spiders who live in the cracks of walls and wainscoting." So all of the liminal things that's where witches derive a lot of their power. Elements are between things. Deities are between things. All of these in-between liminal states is where witches derive power from, whatever that form might take. And I really like that quote because that's so true. Just like, for example, all humans make waste, right? That waste is simultaneously a part of us and not part of us. But it is part of us. We just send it away to go get processed somewhere else, and it's not part of us. That's basically what witches are. They're part of us, but they're also not of us. There's a whole there's a bunch of different societies I can go into beyond the scope of this, what function do witches serve in society, right? Gets away from derivation of magic, but essentially, where I'm pulling most of my work from is from darkness, lunar stuff. I'm working through liminal phases. Something to consider. What's the witchcraft utility? The utility of witchcraft is what we're going to do with that. You derive your power. So you've got this unit that you're working with, this magic energy that you're functioning with. You've communed with whatever you're going to. What are you going to do with it? And that goes back to recalling community. What do you do with that? What do you do for yourself? The same thing with your anxiety and stress. The more that you handle that, the better you're going to interact with others, right? Deriving that magic for yourself is going to be that example for your community, as well as what you can start opening those gates for utility for yourself. The question is what are you going to craft? What are you going to build? Witchcraft, right? What do you craft? What do you literally do in your craft? And what will you make in response to these challenges? And part of that is the untangling that tangled nest. Part of that is I'm going to craft not that. I want to craft something simple, pure, focused. Now I'm building something. How do you assist your own communities? Let's see here. moving from that, those who know and heal. Witches are commonly healers. In some societies, not all of them, but often we see seers, shamans, root workers, so on and so forth. They heal things, and that's one function that your craft can do, and that's what you can craft to resolve stress and anxiety, right? You can heal not just others and give them guidance, you're also giving yourself your own guidance. And knowing things, we're observers. Witches in general are going to observe things, the effect of what is going to happen. I'm going to try something, then something's going to happen. I'm going to raise magical energy, and then I'm going to leverage it in this way, right? For this purpose. And so guiding that manifestation puts you more on your path of what you want to do with, in response to your stress and anxiety. When you get locked in the whole cycle, that I just call the anxiety death spiral, you start manifesting that same thing. So now you're just in this vortex of just creating and manifesting more anxiety. And this is trying to interrupt that by that observation, thinking to yourself, wait a minute, I'm having an anxious response, and it's because of anger. And you're untangling that nest, and then you can choose how you're going to manifest from there. How do we manifest? Any guesses? Or, not just guesses, or ways to manifest.
Spell work.
Spell work, good, I like that. Yes. That's one of, like, what?
Thanks, I tried.
Yeah, super difficult, right? Any other manifestation possibilities?
I guess just focusing intentions, though, really, you could manifest things through intentions.
Yeah, it goes into the energy, right? Because it's a big part of magic, so if you're forcing the energy there, then...
Mm-hmm. Any other takers? I see a knowing glint, where you're just like,
I was
I
kind
don't
of
know.
along the lines with her.
The spell work? Okay.
Well, no, the intentions and, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree. I mean, largely spell work, but then we have to wonder what is spell work in general. What is spell?
Intentions.
It can be. There's actually a good link between the definition of... Let's go to prayer real quick. So prayer was originally the Greek word for to wish, to pray. What is a spell but a wish? Is not spell just prayer? It's manifestation. So all Abrahamic religions that are all, we're going to go pray. You're doing spell work, my dude. You're all doing spell work, errantly everywhere.
Any psalm, it's all basically trying to put a specific energy out there to have one thing happen, so.
Right. And then that gets into some dodgy territory, but I would argue that yes, all prayer is essentially spell work. And all spells are essentially prayer. They're just auxiliary words to each other. In my idea that spell also encompasses not just what you can manifest, but also what it's negative and positive, additive and subtractive magics. Spells in the realm of subtractive negative would be Jinx, Hex, Curse. In that order, Jinx being more inconveniencing, Hex being more this realm, Curse being more generational. From what I've seen in the various historical realms, when you're enchanting things with a Hex or Curse, when you're cursing an object or cursing a family, it's usually a bloodline, multi-generational thing in most of the representations from sociology and anthropology and so on and so forth. Richard, I'm going to slaughter this, Kiefer has Magic in the Middle Ages and talks about some of what curses are. So some of that is referencing from that. Hex being more of a baneful sort of thing, such as political climate currently in a specific country that people are hexing is a more immediate thing and is happening at this particular juncture and experience. And again, Jinx is more of an inconvenience. I want you to lose your keys, right? Not super bad, just super annoying.
I'm telling you, those gnomes put a lot of jinxes on me.
That's where the socks are going.
Don't get me started there.
And then you have enchanting is another branch. Charming, charms and talismans, right? You can enchant something, either negative or positive, with a charm or a talisman. And I tend to think about magic in concepts of negative, positive, additive, subtractive, additive, negative, constructive, destructive. That was the other one, constructive, destructive, in those kinds of paradigms. How that's happening is a question mark, right? There's been plenty of times where I've wanted to hex myself, and I have. Because I'm hexing an idea or concept, something I want to destroy internally. People are like, wait a minute, you can't hex yourself, that's crazy talk. But think about it. It's just like you would have radiation or chemo, right? The same thing. We're going to destroy this organism, and then you're probably going to come back and it'll be fine, right? More or less. And so similarly, how do we want to use these different concepts? So when we talk about spells, then what are they? They're not just the manifestation. It is intent, right? But it also can be that removal of intent. It can be something along those lines as well. It's just helping us kind of understand what we're doing. So if we're wanting to eliminate anxiety and stress, what if you hex your own anxiety and stress? What if you block yourself from being focusing on that specific aspect? Or you could do something additive. Maybe I want to be more resilient. Now there's a whole different aspect, right? All of that falls in the realm of spell work, of that intention manifestation. Personally, I think Witch's primary function is to manifest internally and externally with intent. However that's done, whether that's negative or additive, it doesn't really matter. It's whatever you're doing. And that brings back that same intention, the intention piece of paying attention to your own anxiety and stress and how you want to deal with it. So by focusing on your anxiety and stress and getting that crazy spiral, and then you sort of start building more of that. It's its own spell. You're manifesting the wish to continue that cycle. Maybe you want to interrupt that or think about interrupting that. And those are ways that you can do that with. Oracles were another one. Oracles are exemplifying grace in witchcraft. They often were the pinnacle of existence. People went and got answers from them. And those oracles give insight. Asclepius, temples to Asclepius, not necessarily a dream entity or deity itself in contemporary Greek ancient society, but they would go to these temples for Asclepius, and then they would try to derive information or knowledge about problems they're having. This is a similar thing that you can do with deities or elements that you're working with in your own life, and going to those answers to understand your stress and anxiety. And you can pick apart each one of those pieces in your own responses. Where do I get to that one? Oh, cool, we can do that now. Divination and occult technologies. And this is where the oracle's going to come in. It's that intuition of your own accord to understand. So be your own oracle about your stress and anxiety. And that's that knowing about your death spiral that you might get into, or that locked-in cycle. Divination and occult technology. So divination for me is discerning information from supernatural sources. So things like scrying or neuromancy or those throwing runes, those sorts of things are going to be ways that you can pick apart each one of those difficulties that you're having. So with that, things like your emotions, your biases, your fault, your judgment, you can elucidate that information through your divination. Why am I feeling super angry? Maybe your inner child's super not jazzed about what's going on, and you need to go check in. And that's a great place that you can do that here on neuromancy. Quite literally, is everybody familiar with neuromancy? Dream magic. So neuromancy, there's a lot of conversation around, you can have, and this is where that Gestalt comes in, right? So Gestalt Therapy is having a conversation with an empty chair, right? I'm going to envision this thing and I'm going to have this conversation with it. In neuromancy, you can literally have a dream and go into your own head with your own self, such as an inner child, and have a discussion, go, yeah, why are you bothered by this? Why is this a problem for you? Why did you respond? You're feeling sad about this, or something's going on. You can literally have a one-to-one conversation with your own psyche. Tarot can reveal some of those emotions and drill down into some of what that Tangled Nest is, and start picking apart each one of those and start addressing those. So using divination to your own ends is going to help unravel that Tangled Nest also. Just like oracles do, providing that information, Oracle of Delphi, so on and so forth, temples of Asclepius, you're acting as your own oracle by leveraging those kinds of that divination or those occult technologies to your own advantage. Pendulum work, right? Maybe you can't decide. You have to decide between two things, and it's giving you a super amount of anxiety. Just give it over to a pendulum and just run with what the pendulum says. You can trust in your own divinity in that way, whether that's internally or externally driven or derived, right? You can offload that decision and simplify that process. Again, short-circuiting some of that anxiety and stress. Stress is often a response of anger, fear to things, hesitation around stuff. Maybe you're not doing enough self-care. And all sorts of cartomancy can do that. So Tarot, Litterman can illuminate some of those pieces of yourself. Instead of you just trying to make wild, haphazard guesses of just, I don't know, I feel stressed. Why am I stressed? What are my spheres of influence? Like I was mentioning with astrology, same thing. If you're looking at the transits, you go, wow, I see that, we have Mars running through my house and home where all my feelings are. No, now I understand. Now I'm seeing that this is going to come up for me, that there's going to be a lot of this aggression and emotion. There's going to be this conflict. I might look at the transits, conjunctions, oppositions, squares, trines, that sort of thing, for favorable circumstances. I specifically schedule some of my difficult meetings around favorable days, and I look for things that have more trines. Trines are how much astrology did people have?
Not a ton.
Cool.
Years ago, I was way more into it. I've lost a lot of the stuff that I knew, and it wasn't that much into them.
And did you say you had you had a ton?
No, I do not have a ton.
Got it. Okay.
Very rudimentary.
Conjunctions, super favorable. Trines, the next step down, super favorable, they work together. Squares, not favorable. Times to start looking at your opportunities for development, right? Like we were just talking. Oppositions specifically it's a circle with a line and another circle, and that's saying these two things they're not driving, right? So when I'm looking at transits and I want to schedule a meeting or something, said, hey, we have a work meeting about your performance. And I'm like, whoo boy, I said, when are you available? And I'm like, wait 1 second, and I can go back to my charts and start looking at favorable days that may be more, helpful for that. I'm trying to short circuit some of that anxiety and stress that might be coming from that because now I have a better understanding of when that's going to happen and what things might be affecting me. Similarly, becoming your own oracle. So leveraging these divination types can help you better understand when to interact or when not to interact. Maybe you don't want to say anything. I actually did not check the transits today, and I might have wanted to. I definitely checked last time, but usually when I'm in these kinds of circumstances, I'm looking for, is there a favorable group interaction? Is there I'm looking for things that say, hey, maybe you aren't super articulate today. You might just want to clarify a little bit and go, yeah, I might want to look at that a little bit closer so I can put that in my brain and start building some of those habits in, which is the next thing we're talking about. I'm going to pause real quick. Anybody have any questions? And I actually might not be able to get through all this. Yikes. Did last time. I nailed it. 57 minutes and 4 seconds. Witchcraft utility continued. ABC and CRR. Antecedent behavior control. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Maybe you?
I was an ABA therapist, so
yeah.
I use that all the time.
CRR is cue routine reward. And this is how we build habits. So we have a cue of the thing that's going to happen, the routine of the thing that's going to occur after the cue, and then the reward. And that reward is not necessarily a positive thing. The cue, somebody gets in my face and I want to start freaking out. The routine is I freak out and I slug them in the face. The reward is I feel better. And then you go to jail. And then there's problems, right? Maybe you wanted to change that habit. So cue routine reward is a way to sort of short circuit some of this. The cue of, oh, I'm starting to feel anxious. What am I feeling internally? That's my cue. My routine is I need to address this. Maybe I need to step away. The reward is I'm handling this in a more adaptive way than I might have done in the past. And training yourself to think in this cycle, this certain sequence helps build habits. You can go really into like the neurology side of that, goes in your basal ganglia, and then that gets recorded, and then it becomes a habit, and then you get reward and dopamine from that because you're getting the reward cycle from that, and then you feel super good, and then you keep doing more of it, right? I keep doing this because I get a dopamine reward from this because it makes me feel good because I have a cue routine reward, right? My cue is there's a whole bunch of people here. The routine is I have a conversation. My reward is I have helped the community and I have established graceful witchcraft, right? And I encourage people to go forward and do that. Helping them resolve stress and anxiety is one of them. Even the prognostication of events like astrology, finding out when things are going to happen or where things are going to happen. If you're going to go on a date, somebody's like, hey, we're going to go to this coffee shop. Maybe you look when that coffee shop was founded and see if that works with your natal chart. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe you suggest a whole other place because of that, right? Again, starting to set up something that, establishing those parameters that make you feel the best that you can be. That's what witchcraft can do, provide some of that information. And a very particular one, know thyself, know yourself, very much so. Get intuition, get weird with it, right? Start finding out why you freak out the way you do, or why you do things a certain way, or why you look for certain cues. And again, that's part of your artful craft and awareness of yourself. The biggest, people ask me, how do I get into witchcraft? The biggest piece is work on yourself. That's the biggest spell that you could possibly create throughout your entire life. You are in that of itself, a living embodiment of that spiritual, divine, magic energy that you've worked with. And it's up to the witch to do that and address that and nurture it and care for it. Or don't, and then things get super crazy, and then you get things following you around, you start seeing shadow people, and you start losing your mind, you're hearing stuff, and then you're having all sorts of other problems, right? Pay attention to yourself. Know why you respond the way you do, and be okay with the fact that we probably have some seriously maladaptive ways to handle things, as do all of us, right? There's just some ways, like, people want to escape and they want to jump out of a situation, they go and hide, right? Not really adaptive. It doesn't help you do anything. It just gets you away from it, kind of, for a second, and that can trigger a whole bunch of other things. Cue, routine, reward, right? The cue is, I ran away from the situation. Routine is, I'm going to go hide, and I get away from it. Reward is, I don't have to deal with this anymore. Then we start seeing the same cycle get repeated, and then now we're not dealing with anything, right? Be aware of yourself, work with yourself, use those tools that you have of divination and occult technologies, and be that oracle for yourself. And exploring crisis. Crisis is super helpful. It's a functional role. We need crisis. And I sort of touched on this before. When you're presented with these opportunities, that's a time when you can go, oh, this is an opportunity for change, the catalyst, the crucible of your own change. And what a great gift. Somebody screaming in your face, freaking out about witchcraft, whatever. It's a great thing because now I have an opportunity to have a different conversation. And so, like I said, use it as a catalyst. Your own magic to your own catalyst, right? Prevent crisis from occurring in the first place by understanding what's going to happen that day or in that area and get a better idea. Use cardmancy to give you some idea of what's this agent going to work with. If I've got a meeting with somebody or meeting a new friend, I might pull a card and go, oh, this is what represents them. What represents me? How does this work? How does this look like in my astrology? How does it look like in the transits? You know, oof, I might need to work on this area because it's showing that you're not the best at communication right now. Okay, you can think about that, and it changes that approach, so you can avoid or move around some of that a little bit easier. And it's an opportunity to refine and hone yourself. We're only refined by that which challenges. That gives us that opportunity. Self-development is huge. Shadow work, whatever you want to call that, working with your child, all of those are opportunities to continue to refine and hone yourself. Learning to recognize your functional signs. Have a flexible plan, right? Functional signs, what you do in response to things, and be aware of recognizing the steps that are leading up to a certain behavior that might be adaptive or maladaptive, and both, right? If I know the steps to get into an adaptive response to crisis, keep doing more of that. If you see the steps that are leading to maladaptive, maybe not do that, right? Unless you just want to be super maladaptive and just be chaos incarnate and then just destroying everything around you. I personally don't want to do that, and I don't think most of you want to. So that adaptive piece is really helpful to understand those steps and observing those things. Again, witches are observers. They want to know these things. So get that in and use those as functional signs. And have a flexible plan. Maybe you have all the steps and you do all the things the way you think they're going to, and they still go sideways. Be flexible. You might not get it right every single time, and you're not. You're fallible. That's the thing. We're not perfect. I know. I've ruined everybody's day. Proactive resolutions, again, the same thing, using your tools to your own advantage to be proactive in your life and in your situations, and utilizing magic to those ends. Satisfying, and I don't have this written down, you might have one of you might actually know this. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, satisfy those, right? They're really important. If you're not secure in yourself and you're not getting the things you need, you can't really go on past that and satisfy each one of those. And somewhere in that, your anxiety is short-circuiting somewhere in that need, right? Your need to escape, your need to address, whatever that happens to be. So make sure that you're paying attention to your own personal needs. Intrusive thoughts. This is again that cue of routine reward. Intrusive thoughts of, man, I just want to punch that dude in the face for being such a terrible person, right? Those are the intrusive thoughts. Intrusive thoughts of, I just want to harm stuff. That happens. That's okay. I know I have those thoughts. I just don't feed them, right? Two wolves story, Native America, whoever's familiar with that story. You have two wolves in yourself. Yeah, and you feed whichever one gets bigger, right?
Yeah.
Same kind of concept here. Those intrusive thoughts that you have that interrupt, or the intrusive thought of, oh, I'm a terrible person. I'm super sad, and I deserve this treatment. That's an intrusive thought, right? You don't need to be in that space. Don't give into that, right? And be aware of that. That's part of those functional steps. Active paralysis and inaction halting your progress. paralysis of, let's see here, it was fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And that means basically cowing to a response. Somebody threatens you, and you fawn and go, it's okay, you totally are right, right? That's totally a thing. It's not just freezing, right? And those specific things that result in some of that active paralysis. You're no longer in charge of your own narrative. You're not interjecting that. You're not short-circuiting that, and that leads to some of that stress, and it leads to all of your stress and anxiety mostly. You're having somebody else dictate your narrative for you, and you're letting those intrusive thoughts just run rampant instead of being centered in yourself and knowing yourself well enough to go, that's not how I feel. That's not correct, or, yeah, no, that's totally my response, and I really don't appreciate myself working that way. How can I do that differently? Not, man, I'm such a terrible person for continuing to do this behavior. Short-circuiting that same thing, helping to relieve that stress and anxiety. And also this results in inaction, as well as halting your own progression forward. If you get stuck in those intrusive thoughts and those narratives that other people dictate for you, you can't progress at all in yourself. And then you get trapped and then now you're not doing anything and you're just mired in what that is. And then you're not doing, like, that's not witchcraft. You're not manifesting anything. Everybody's doing it to you instead of you being an active agent. Self-check-in, methods to monitor. Monitor yourself, find things that, if you start feeling tense, or if you feel yourself, find those signs that start informing you that I'm about to have an anxious response. I need to figure out what that is and how can I alleviate, reduce those things. You're not going to do this, there's not a silver bullet, none of this is, right? You're going to get some of it right, some of it wrong. Some days it's going to be perfect, right? Your awareness of your own responses emotionally and physically to charged situations is going to reduce a lot of that anxiety and stress, because I had this conversation with one of the church members actually. They had a rather maladaptive response to a particular individual, and we talked about it, and I said, how did you respond? What did you do correct? What did you do incorrect? And then we had a conversation about that, and then I said, how would you have done this differently? Let's look at the steps that led up to this. What were the phases before you got into the, I'm going to scream at this person and call them terrible things, right? What did you need to do prior to that? And then we're working through some of that so we can be better as an organization, but also for their benefit, right? So that they have a better idea of their own narrative. Because somebody else was dictating their narrative. They let somebody else tell their story for them instead of being in charge of their own responses, leading to rage and all that stuff. And they're aware of that, and so we're all working on that. Every one of us has to take charge of that narrative. Otherwise, we're just going to be subject to that same lack of control, and we'll be subject to stress and anxiety and those sort of things because some other narrative is implanted there instead. Is that 5? Yep, that's 5. 6 final thoughts. Let's go until it kicks out. Somebody standing out the door?
No.
Okay. These techniques are preventative. So preventative, knowing yourself, being your own oracle, using those technologies to yourself, divination, all those are preventative techniques before you get there. Not just after. So the thing happens and then you have a tarot reading and go, why did this happen? Do it beforehand. Using before and also during your crises, right? Just like I was saying, you can find a space holder or somebody to listen to, right? You don't necessarily need a friend to solve. You don't need a deity to solve. You just need to listen. Right? Somebody just to be able to hold that space and that of yourself. Build in your own responses to cue, routine, reward. And those are from yourself. They form your self-care habits. You can be the paragon of graceful witchcraft, and you can be the space holder. Because not only do you need a space holder for yourself, do that for others, right? Other people are stressed out and anxious and freaking out, right? And if you have a place where you're really centered and you have a pretty strong narrative, excellent. Now you can hold space for other people and demonstrate that same behavior. Admit to needing assistance. It's totally okay. We're a hot mess. We're basically, what is it, cucumbers with anxiety? Is that what most of humans are? Right? They just are. We're nervous wrecks. These brains do weird stuff.
Some are more pickled than others.
Pickle Rick! But yes, admit to needing assistance. It's okay. You're not going to be good at this. Like, it takes time, and there are going to be new situations that pop up that you're not prepared for. That just go, wow, oops. Just like I had the conversation with one of the church members that they went, yeah, did not handle that well. Oops. Let's have a conversation. They admitted, I need assistance. I didn't handle that well. How do we do this differently? Again, this is the opportunity for change. Changing your narrative. Being vulnerable. You can be vulnerable in a lot of spaces. Vulnerable to yourself. There's a whole mess of defenses from you to yourself. And breaking those down through witchcraft, divination, being your own oracle, it's breaking that vulnerability down internally for yourself, but also being vulnerable spaces like with your coven or spiritual groups that you might have. Those are spaces you can be vulnerable in. And if you can't be vulnerable in a coven or a spiritual group, you should probably leave that group. And I can say that pretty firmly, because if a group that you're part of is making you feel more alienated and engendering worse things that are less adaptive, perhaps not. Perhaps you may want to wander away from that. So a space that you can be vulnerable in is important. And being okay with that. I'm fairly strong in that of myself. I handle a lot of things. I spend a lot of time around adversity and maladaptive behaviors all of my existence. And I have had to build in I had to be aware to be vulnerable and understand where those walls were and when I needed to go and go, hey, I need assistance with this. I can't handle this, or I need to step away from this, or I can't help you right now. I need some time. And so I'm okay with being vulnerable. Not in every situation, but certainly it's an important thing to understand. And practice for discipline. The more you do this, the more that you come to grips with yourself, being that oracle, transitioning through these things, practicing that graceful, artful witchcraft, being that example, holding space for people, is building in that discipline, that cue, routine, reward. The antecedent behavior consequence, that's the ABC. I forgot I didn't define that. Antecedent behavior consequence, the thing that happened before, the behavior that happened because of it, and the consequence of that thing, right? So ABCs, right? The antecedent for somebody, when I see somebody starting to get really hyped up, and they start getting super angry, or it gets whatever, I can see that antecedent starting to happen. I know their behavior is going to go to aggression, and I know the consequence is going to be terrible interactions. And so I try to short circuit that way beforehand and go, you might want to take a break. Like, you might want to step out of the room. Knowing those things and practicing that is going to build more of that discipline so you can be more aware for yourself and build your own narrative around that, and using witchcraft to alleviate that stress and anxiety too. Questions or comments?
Well, this is awesome though.
Good. Did I give you some things to think about?
I love it. I think it's great. I love the psychology narrative that goes through, because that's like where my brain goes automatically. But these are a lot of things that are just really basic psychological principles of, like, I have terrible anxiety too.
Mm-hmm.
I used to tell myself, like, no, I have a mental health background. You can't possibly have anxiety. That's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
Totally ridiculous. But finding these things, like these ways of interrupting these thoughts has been, like, cognitive behavioral therapy has been life-changing. Using it on myself, like I used to just use it on other people, and I was like, oh, I can do that to myself.
Right.
And it's super helpful to, instead of just feeling like you get carried away with the emotion, like you don't have any control over it, once you finally start recognizing the antecedent behaviors and you start thinking, why am I really upset? Like, why am I really, and then things start to change. But it's difficult to get to that point. So being cognizant of it and being like, okay, well, I'm gonna try harder. I'm just gonna try to recognize it, and you will see amazing results. I mean, it's not all the time, obviously, but it's very helpful.
Yep.
I like it.
Divination is one of those things that's basically your third-party semi-objective observer. And it's basically saying, it's giving you a reflection point. It's giving you that triangle, right? So I have a me thing that's happening, I have a situation that's happening, and that third observer is your divination. And what that's doing is saying, here's a mostly unbiased view of what this sphere of influence is currently occurring. And you go, oh, that totally fits. And not just any cartomancy, but any of the divination tools can be used as that third-party semi-objective viewer. And that helps for me, it helps differentiate between me, myself as an observer, and I can separate those out, and that can take its place, right? Otherwise, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. I almost got it on time. Almost.
It's actually faster, yeah.
I think it's great that these
What
are
time is
like
it?
happening though.
6:30.
Oh.
I love that there is a place for like people to get together and get information, like no pressure kind of thing. Because some of the other things, you know what I mean? I think you're right, like, I'm a fairly, like, open-minded, I'll go to whatever, but, like, some things are, like, it seems like more of a professional level, like, it doesn't seem like you could just walk in and be like, I just want to get some information. So
Yeah.
I like that it's very relaxed,
I'm glad.
very chill.
Sign up, sign in, that would be great if you want
Yeah.
more information. Also, we have our Discord stuff, so if you want to start talking with the church, working with other people, that's great. We're always looking for affiliate people to help church do stuff, because there's only 3 of us. Like, that's a lot. And we're in Denver and in Colorado Springs, it's a lot. So we can be kind of slow to adapt things, just because there's only so much energy we have. Again, boundaries, narratives, routine reward. Right, we have to be aware of that, because if we're not healthy, we can't do anything for our community. And so it's really important for us to have these kinds of conversations.
So you're gonna have another one at the end of the month? Is that what I heard you
In
say?
Denver.
In Denver is the one at the end.
Yep.
So is it like once a month?
I'm having it once a month.
Love it.
So every month we're doing one of these. I think the next one for Colorado Springs is going to be the beginning of May. I think probably May 7th. I think same location, same bad time, all that stuff.
Great.
And like I said, these recordings will be available on YouTube as well. So share the things, do the stuff, help us, get this message out there so people can hear this, because you don't have to be part of the church if you don't want to. We're not going to force you to do anything. We're going to make you witches. Unless you want to. We've got an Emperor's program for that, for mentorship.
The witch police are coming after me.
Right? With the
You gotta put a sign on my door. Everybody have a pagan blood, whatever.
Right? It should be. We really want to be that accepting kind of space, right? Because covens should be fulfilling this role. I don't see a lot of covens maintaining that, and they're really too focused on like that magical internal aspect of we're going to worship in this way, in this practice, and forget the rest of the community.
So it's funny because kind of a group of us were having a very similar conversation. Ends up being more about religion and the place of today, in the sense how people have brought. But I was explaining, I was like, first of all, whatever you want to look at it, religion, spirituality, usually comes in a place of like downtrodden, right? Like people are oppressing you. You need to find something to believe in to explain why you're in that situation. What can bring us out of the situation if we're not in control? So it's got to be another being or whatever kind of central thing. And the hope is that everybody's on the same page. But eventually somebody wants to be the one in charge. Somebody wants to be the one that has more power. Somebody wants to control that. So whether you call it communism, this or that, look, the reality is, yes, everybody can be on the same page. We're talking about perfection of the world, right? But that's not it. If you can find people that have the same beliefs and can be open, again, what's the most important thing in the world? Communication, right? Like, without that, love that won't matter, like all the different things. So it's interesting because now is there really, I think, a great opening for witchcraft, for witchery, for, for other types of pagan, because people, it's kind of in 2 ways. People are either running away from what they grew up knowing, believing in, or grabbing onto it so tight that whoever's the leader in their eye, whatever they say to them, they're just going to follow it, like, to that T.
Right.
And to be able to, like, again, having an open discussion, having a forum, and be like, there's so much more than this. Like, you can find your own path using, and that's what has always attracted me. My whole life has been about love, life, and death. You can't have any one of the 3 without the other 2, There's just no life without death, and there's no death without a light of life. So, it's like...
Is that right?
No.
Okay.
But they're coming to collect you.
So eventually they will.
Put you in the witch band.
So that's why I love this, because it's like, again, for being somebody who's a little bit more on the other side of things, still very spiritual, but again, like the psychology, it's all stuff that I follow.
The community is great. As soon as I started doing expos and things, I was like, oh, I'm just meeting all these like super nice people, and everyone's so great, and might be into some different stuff, but like it's nice. It's nice to have a community.
Yeah.
I think that's lovely.
I'm doing my coven is doing a magic study hall on the 24th of this month, and that's just a variety of topics, basically just to work on whatever it is you're working on in witchcraft. I'm working on Hobbit stuff.
Where is that going to be at?
That's at my house.
That's at my house.
Yeah. Well, the church thing was like it had barriers to the public, so it was less threatening and less.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like.
Yeah.
Especially for females, it's like, hey, there's some dude, he wants me to come to his house and talk about witchcraft. We're like,
Exactly.
no.
I had to find a very neutral space that was really accepting and easy to find, and so that people were not in that intimidated, threatened space, because we're already talking witchcraft, it's already going to be a little challenging and intimidating, and some of the conversations are going to be kind of
It
hard.
was a good thought. I think that was well planned out.
But you can reach us, sign in, there's a business card over there too.
Yes,
Sure,
yes,
just
thank you.
Email us and that sort of thing. Thank you again for being here. I appreciate all of you, and maybe we'll see you in the next one too.
I'll probably be back. It was great.
Excellent.
Oh, flying frog.
We missed the last one because I was like, bro, it is snowing outside.
It was quite cold.
It was